So you have your page, you're displaying some data, and now you want to make changes to that data. How do you do that with SvelteKit? That's what we're going to see today. We're going to take a look at how to create form actions, how to add validations, and how to improve usability through form enhancements. So let's take a look at it. But first, just a quick recap of what we're building here. We're building a travel journal app. We have some trips here. We have some entries for our journal entries. We have some pictures. We could, in theory, create a new trip, but this is not working yet. And we don't have a way to add new entries. That's what we're going to fix today. We're going to add a way to create trips, create entries, and delete entries. In the code, what we have is a code that is relying on Drizzle to talk to a SQLite database. We have here a schema for that. You can take a look at this, but that's very standard Drizzle stuff. I have a seed files just with some seed data, and two files here, mutations and queries. Queries is doing exactly that, querying the database, and mutations is making the changes to the database, like creating entries or creating trips. That's it. It doesn't change anything at all related to SvelteKit, but I just want to go over that. With all that said, let's start by creating a new trip. So right now, this route here, trips./new, is not doing anything. So I'm going to add a new file here, plus page.server.ts. And I am going to paste some code in here, import the dependencies as needed, and let's go over what this code is doing. Form actions in SvelteKit are created by exporting an actions object. When we export a default key in the actions object, we're exporting a default form action for this route, in this case /trips/new. That means that any post HTTP request will be handled by this code here. And what is this code doing? It's taking the request, retrieving the data from the form, looking at a field name destination within the form data, then calling Drizzle to create this destination, and then redirect with the ID of the trip that was just created. That's pretty much it. Now, as I said, this responds to a post, which means I need to come here to this page and change my form to send a post. And all of this here is standard HTTP form handling. So I have a name destination for this input here, which matches what I'm looking for right now. And because I already had this code written before to create the trip using Drizzle in the backend, if I come back here to this page and I try to create a trip to Rio de Janeiro, I can create a trip and that's it. It's been created. Now, quick recap before we go and move forward. As I said here, default is a default action, but we can have named actions, and this is useful in routes where we have different kinds of actions with different forms being sent to the backend. And this is what we're going to do in this page here. We're going to have a form to create a new entry, and we're going to have a form for each one of the entries to delete the entry. So we're going to start coming here to the server file. And once again, I'm going to export an actions object, import the dependencies, which in this case are, again, the redirect, a create entry, and a delete entry. But both forms, they are doing things very similar to the one that we saw before. Not forms, actually, actions. So we're retrieving the data from the form, getting the fields that we need. So in order to add an entry, I'm looking at title and description, creating an entry using Drizzle, and then redirecting. And in this case, we're redirecting to the same page so that the page gets reloaded. And for delete, it's again very similar. Getting the form, getting a field entry ID, deleting using Drizzle, and redirecting. The key part here is that we're creating named actions. So add entry and delete entry are the names of the actions that we're creating. So we need to have counterparts on the HTML that we're going to send. So let's look at that right now. There could be several ways to handle this UI. I chose to do one, which is using a dialog. Let me search for it quickly here. Adding a dialog, a HTML standard dialog, to create that entry. So we're gonna see a model being displayed. We're gonna fill in the title. We're gonna fill in the description, and we're gonna save that. But that's handled all through this dialog here. We have some things to fill in before we can use it. I'm gonna copy and paste some code in here. We're gonna bind that dialog to this entry dialog variable. We're gonna keep track of if the dialog is open or closed in this other one here. And this I need in order to either show the model or close the model here, depending on the value in entry dialog open. There's a small handler here, which is when we click outside of the dialog, we can close it. Not necessary, but it's in there. And if we go back to our dialog here, there's a form. And the most important part here, which is related to form actions, is the add entry name here. This is a syntax that we use to tell SvelteKit that this is a named action, and this is the name of the action, and it matches what we have in here. So that's the related parts to SvelteKit form actions. In this form here, we have an input with a title, another one with the description, and I also have a button here that is commented out that I'm gonna uncomment to just open. So this button is just opening the dialog. That's it. So we can now see this in action. If I click, so I see this button now, I can click on here and I can type in entry 1 and a test and save the entry. And there you go. We can create an entry. You can see the entry in here. Now we need to handle the delete entry, and I'm gonna search for delete here. So there you go. I'm gonna paste another form here, and this is what I pasted. The important part again is that we have an action with a name that matches the name that we had on the back end. We're just sending in an entry ID as a hidden field, and that's pretty much it. So if I come back here to the page now, I have a delete in here. I can click on it and it's going to delete the entries. Now let's add some validation. And to simplify, I'm going to go back to the new trip here and add a validation to this form first. We're going to add to the other one in a second, but first on this here. I need to come back to this function here, and after we retrieve the destination, we're going to do a couple of things here. First, we're going to see if there is a value for destination, and if there is not, that's how we validate in SvelteKit. We're going to return a fail, anything that didn't pass the test that we wanted it to pass. So in this case, if there is no value, we return that destination is required. Then we're gonna retrieve a trip by name if it exists. That means we cannot have two trips to the same place. We are validating that we only have one entry for the same place. And that's pretty much it. Now, we're validating this. We're returning errors when they happen. We need to display those errors on the page. So let's switch back to the markup here. And right after the input, I'm gonna add this piece of code here, which is checking for form.errors.destination. So I'm checking to see if there's any error related to the destination field, but form is failing here. And this is because we didn't import forms, TS, and we're gonna get form from the props. And the error now has been solved. Let's test this first, and then I'll talk a little bit more about this form. So if I reload this page and I try to create a new trip without anything in here, it's telling me that destination is required, and this is coming from the backend. Of course, if we wanted to, we could just say that this is required, but it's good practice to always validate on the backend anyway. But now we have this in here. But if I say that I'm trying to add another one to Rio de Janeiro, we're going to create trip here and destination already exists. So it's validating. Another thing that we're not seeing here is whatever I typed here, in this case, Rio de Janeiro, is not being displayed anymore. So let's fix that by retrieving the initial value of this field from form.destination. And just like that, we do have Rio de Janeiro here. Now, let's talk about this form object here, because this is important. Whenever we have an action that returns any data from the backend, in this case, we're returning this piece of data right after the error status code. So they're matching. The structure of those two objects are matching, but this object here is what is used to populate form in the props that the component is receiving. So these two, they match to each other. Let me go back to the right one here. And I can show you this by just changing this to user errors, for instance. And I'm going to change this one to user errors, save. And if I go back here, you're going to see that, okay, without doing anything, now we have TypeScript errors saying, okay, user errors do not exist. I need to look into user errors for this, and now it does exist. The other part is I have form.destination here, which is being returned from this field here, right? So I'm returning back whatever was sent to the action so that we can fill the field with the correct value in here. And that's the basics of validating data with SvelteKit. Of course, you could use libraries like Zod or any other libraries to help you do that. But in essence, you would be doing something similar to this, validating on the backend, returning a fail message if there is any error. Let's continue and add some validation to this action here when we are adding an entry. So after we retrieved both title and description, I'm going to paste in another code. I'm going to import fail. And what I am validating here is that we need to have both fields, title and description. If either one of those are not present, we're going to fail, and we're going to send just one generic message. I don't care which one is missing. We're sending one single message within this key form here. Now, the other part is, of course, we need to display this error, and I'm going to do it right after the header of the dialog here. Okay, there you go. We see that we don't have the form here, so we need to import from the props, and the same principle is applied. We are getting the form object from the form action. Now this fails without error, and notice that I have returned this key here with the error description. So now let's test this out. I'm gonna come here to Rio de Janeiro, reload this for a second, and try to create a new entry and not fill in the description. Let's see what's gonna happen. So I see no errors. The entry was not added. And if I click in here to see the dialog, we see the add a title and the description error in here. Why is this happening? Well, because you probably know this, but the normal behavior of an HTTP post is to reload the whole page. And that's what we're doing. But because I decided to use a dialog to manage this form, the dialog is not open when we first render the page, right? So we don't see it. Now we need to fix this. How can we do that with SvelteKit? The easiest way is to enhance the form. So we do that by just adding here a use enhance and import this from app.forms. And let's see what happens now. I'm gonna try, and this is showing the previous error. So if I reload this quickly and I try to add an entry 1 without a text, we're gonna save and we see this immediately. What the use enhance does is it injects JavaScript to handle the call to the form action and the response of the form action. So we don't have to reload the whole page to do that. And it does that if JavaScript is available. Now, if I stop there, we're gonna see a different problem. Let me add some text here to the description and save this entry. We're gonna see that it added something here. So you see the delete button here. It never closed the dialog and it never reset the form, but the data is there. You can see that if I just reload this, the data is there. So the thing is, using enhance as it is, it has a standard behavior. It doesn't know anything about our UI, and the dialog adds some complexity in there. So how can we handle that? We have to customize that use enhance. And I'm gonna do that by passing a callback function. So using enhance calls back a function and passes a form element. Form element is this form here. And we can return a function that will then receive a result, and this result is the result of calling the form action, and update, where we can use to update the state of the UI, the form UI. Now, the result here, if the type is redirect, we know it is a successful result because we know that we only redirect when it is successful. So if it is successful, we can close the dialog and we can reset the form, and then we can update the whole state of the form. Let's see if this is working now. So I'm gonna add another entry here. Entry 2, add more tests. There you go. We can see that this is actually working. If I click on this button here, we're gonna see that the form has been reset as we expected, and it had closed the dialog right after we inserted this. Now, let's try a different thing here. And I'm going to come to my mutations file. And when creating a new entry, I'm going to make this a little bit slow by adding a delay here. And we're going to try and save again. So pay attention to what's going to happen here. I'm going to create this entry number 3. And when I save this, this is going to take a second and a half to close this dialog. And then we're going to load the data from the page. There you go. Now, this could be a common pattern. You have a mutation or a backend that takes some time to execute, but the UI is not very responsive. So we have a way, again, using enhancements to improve on this. So how I'm going to do this? The first thing here is that I'm going to come back to this file, and instead of having a inline function here, I'm going to create a different one inside of my script tag here. And I'm just going to copy this and come back here and replace all of this with that new function. Let's go back because we have a few errors. Import dependencies. Okay, there you go. We have a page that we need, and this is looking for entries. So how I'm going to do this now? I'm going to take this data.entries that we have here and we receive when we first load the page and store this into an entries array. I'm going to make sure that the accordion entries actually uses that. Okay. So this is just keeping entries in the state. And in this handle add entry submit here, what we are doing now is we're creating a new entry, setting the title, the description with data from the form that we get from form data here, creating just a fake ID, getting the trip ID from the routes params, and setting the current timestamp. Then we're adding it to the array, so that the accordion that we're displaying out there is updated, closing the dialog, resetting the form. And then after the action was called, we're updating the state of the form. So let's take a look at this here and see what's going to happen. I'm going to add a new entry number 4. Immediately displayed in here. And then we loaded the photos. So again, the photos here are syntactically slower, 2 seconds to load the photos so that we can see it. But we're adding this and closing the dialog as soon as we hit that save entry button. Let's see this one more time in action here. So entry 5, test. We're not gonna wait for the 1.5 seconds that we have here. We're just gonna close this dialog and add to the array of entries here. There you go. Now, I mentioned the photos here, right? And whenever I'm adding a new entry, the photos is being reloaded. So what happens is when we call this update here, we're telling SvelteKit that the whole data here is being invalidated. And because all of the data from this page comes from this one single load function here, so we have the trip, the entries, and the photos here, we have to wait for all of this to come back, and photos is, in this case, very slow. So that's why we see that loading status of the photos. But the photos have never changed. And we are actually manipulating the entries manually. So we don't need to wait for all of that. What we can do is we need to do 2 things. First, we first need to return the created entry directly, so we don't redirect. Otherwise, calling redirect is going to cause the load function to be triggered again. And just for sake of it, I'm going to do the same thing here on the delete right now. The other part is when we're calling update here, we can tell SvelteKit to invalidate all false. What it means is it's now invalidating all the data, and it doesn't need to fetch all the data for this page here, right? So if I come here now, let's see this. So what I am expecting to see now is I reloaded the page, it loaded photos, all the data that I needed. I'm going to create an entry number 6. And when I create this, it's going to immediately add this, and it's never going to retrigger that photos there. Actually, it's not going to retrigger any of the data, but we can visually see the photos. And you can see that it never reloaded this. So if I come here in the network tab, we try to create a new entry. So entry number 7. And I save the entry. You're going to see that the only request that we have is for adding an entry. If I remove the invalidate all here, let's remove everything from it. And then we try to add entry number 8. And let me clear this so that we can see. We're going to save, and more data is being loaded, right? Because we're not invalidating all the data. I'm going to switch back to this. So that's the power of this. It's the power, and also it starts adding complexity because we have to handle everything manually, but we can optimize for the experience that we want to provide. Now, if we go back to the page here and look at delete, and let's try to delete this entry here, we're going to see that we're still loading photos. So we need to do something similar for delete. And I'm going to copy some code in here. Again, I'm going to add another handler. So handle, delete, entry, submit, and it's doing something very similar. But now we're getting the entry from the form. We are filtering out from the entries, so removing it automatically. And once the action has been returned, we call update without invalidating everything. So let me look for the delete here, and I'm gonna do a use enhance, and I'm gonna pass that handle, delete, entry, submit. We should now be able to delete this without triggering the photos being reloaded. It's not just the photos, it's all the data from the page, but photos is visible. There you go. It's been deleted, nothing has triggered, and of course, always see this in the network tab. So let's delete this one. And it's the only request that we made when we delete something. Now, there is still a bug on this page, and I'm going to show you what it is. Once I'm adding a new entry, we're at entry number 9 now, and I save this. If I try to delete this, I would expect it to work, but it's not going to work. So if I click on this, it disappears because we're removing it automatically. But when I reload this page, I see entry 9 back again. And why that is? Well, if we go back and look at this function here, we're creating an ID on the front end. But on the back end, when we create this, we are creating a different ID, and we're never updating the state of the page with the new entry ID. So we do need to do that, because when we call delete, we just get whatever is on the page, and those IDs are different. So the way to do this is, now I'm looking at the update, and I need to get the result from this callback. If it is a success and we have data, that means we've safely created a new entry. So we get that created entry, and then we update our entries with the new entry that has the correct ID. If this failed for whatever reason, we just remove that entry from the entries array. And that's pretty much it. Now, if I come back here, I'm going to add a new entry number 10, test, save. Now, without reloading anything, I'm going to try and delete this. And when I do, it disappears automatically from here. If I reload the page, it's not there anymore because we are updating the correct ID to that entry as needed. So that's it. That's all I had to say about farm actions today. I hope you had something to learn. Farm enhancements can be a little bit tricky, but they are very good to provide better usability. That's it. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.